"Sign it," her mother whispered, "or we lose everything." Lily Carter looked at the paper. One signature. Her name. Her life traded for a debt she hadn't borrowed to a man she'd never met in a county where no one would look twice at a girl being handed over like a line in a ledger. She was 18 years old. She picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She wouldn't let it shake, and when the ink dried, the man in the gray suit gathered his papers without a word, as if what had just happened in that kitchen was nothing more than a routine transaction. Because to everyone in that room, it was. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Lily's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story has traveled. Madeline Carter had always told her daughter that a person's worth couldn't be measured in dollars. She said it when Lily was 7 and came home crying because a girl at school had laughed at her patched dress. She said it when Lily was 12 and their mule died and they couldn't afford another one, and Lily had to walk 4 miles each way to the schoolhouse. She said it the morning Lily turned 18, pressing a dry kiss to her daughter's forehead and whispering that no matter what happened, Lily was worth more than this world knew how to say. She said all of that, and then she handed Lily a pen and told her to sign her name to a piece of paper that said otherwise. The debt collector's name was Forsyth. He wore a gray suit that was too fine for Dust River County, Montana territory, and he kept his hat on indoors, which Lily had always thought was the mark of a man who didn't respect anyone in the room. He'd arrived that morning before the coffee was even hot, and he'd sat himself at their kitchen table like he owned it, which Lily supposed was the point. He'd spread the documents out with the care of a man who'd done this many times before and had stopped feeling anything about it. "Mrs. Carter," Forsyth had said, not looking at Lily at all, "the arrangement is straightforward. The sum owed to Mr. Hale's lending office stands at $412. Mr. Mercer has agreed to absorb the debt in full effective upon the signing." Madeline had nodded. She'd nodded the way people nod when they've already cried themselves dry, and there's nothing left but the motion. "What does that mean?" Lily asked. "What does he get in return?" Forsyth looked at her then. It was the kind of look a man gives something he's calculating rather than seeing. "A wife," he said simply. "Legal and proper. Ceremony can be arranged within the week. I'm 18 years old." "Which makes you of legal age, Miss Carter." "I haven't agreed to anything." Forsyth glanced at Madeline, then back at Lily. "The debt is in your mother's name. The house is collateral. If the sum isn't settled by end of month—" "I know what happens," Lily said. She did know. She'd watched it happen to the Hendersons 2 years back. 4 children, a mother who'd taken ill, a father who'd borrowed against a bad harvest. Victor Hale's men had come with paperwork and a sheriff's deputy, and they'd taken everything. The family had ended up in a boarding house in Billings, the mother still coughing, the father broken in ways that didn't heal. Lily knew exactly what happened. She looked at her mother. Madeline's hands were folded in her lap and she was staring at the table. She wouldn't meet Lily's eyes, and that was the thing that cracked something open in Lily's chest. Not the debt. Not the gray-suited man with his careful documents. The fact that her mother couldn't look at her. "Mama." "Lily. Look at me." Madeline looked up. Her eyes were red and her face was a map of every sorry she couldn't say. "Sign it," she whispered. "Or we lose the house. We lose everything. Please, Lily. Please." Lily took the pen. She held it for a long moment. Forsyth had the patience of a man being paid by the outcome rather than the hour. "I am not property," Lily said. She said it quietly. She said it to the room, to Forsyth, to her mother, to whatever version of God might be paying attention to the kitchen of a broke widow in Montana territory in the year 1873. Then she signed her name. Forsyth gathered the papers with the efficiency of a man who'd heard stranger things and had no opinion about any of them. He stood, replaced his hat, he'd never taken it off, and told them a wagon would come at first light tomorrow to collect Miss Carter and her belongings. "Her belongings," Lily repeated. "Whatever she can carry," Forsyth said. "Mr. Mercer isn't an unreasonable man." Then he left, and Lily and her mother sat in the kitchen with the coffee going cold between them, and neither of them spoke for a very long time. That night, Lily packed. She didn't have much. A dress she'd sewn herself, 2 others that had been her mother's, a pair of winter boots with the left sole coming loose, a Bible with her grandmother's name in the front cover, a folding knife her father had left behind when he died, which she kept not for sentimentality, but because a girl alone needed something with an edge. She packed all of it into a canvas bag that smelled like the cedar chest where it had lived, and she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the room she'd slept in for her entire life. She didn't cry. She thought about crying. She turned it over in her mind the way you might handle something fragile, examining it from all sides. But crying felt like surrender, and she wasn't ready to surrender yet. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't know what Caleb Mercer was like, or what he expected, or what his ranch looked like, or whether there was anyone else out there who might have fought harder for her than she'd managed to fight for herself in the space of one morning. What she knew was this: she had signed a paper. The paper said she was a wife. That didn't mean it said anything true about who she was. She lay down on her bed with her boots still on, and she stared at the ceiling until the dark outside went gray, and then she got up and carried her bag to the front of the house. Her mother was already awake. Madeline had made biscuits, the same biscuits she always made when she didn't know what else to do with her hands, and she'd set them on the table with a cloth over them to keep them warm. "You should eat," Madeline said. "I'm not hungry." "Lily." "I'm not angry at you," Lily said. "I need you to know that. I'm not angry at you." It was partially true. She was something at her mother, something complicated and bruised that didn't have a clean name, but underneath it she understood. She was 18. She'd signed papers that men had put in front of her. Her mother had done the same thing once, and look how that had turned out. Madeline came around the table and put her arms around Lily and held on, and for just a moment Lily let herself be held. Just a moment. "You'll write?" Madeline said into her hair. "Yes, and if anything—" "I'll handle it," Lily said. Madeline pulled back and looked at her face, searching it the way mothers search for something to reassure themselves. Whatever she found, she nodded. The wagon came at first light, as promised. Caleb Mercer's ranch was 16 miles north of Dust River, and Lily spent the entire ride studying everything she could about the driver and getting nothing useful. He was a hired man, taciturn even by Montana standards, and he answered her questions with single words or not at all. "How long have you worked for Mr. Mercer?" "Years." "What's he like?" Silence. "Is there other staff at the ranch?" "Some." "Is he—" She paused. Thought about how to ask it. "Is he a decent man?" The driver considered this for longer than any of the other questions. Then he said, "He doesn't drink," which Lily understood was meant as a form of reassurance and also as the outer limit of what the man intended to tell her. She rode the rest of the way in silence. The ranch emerged from the flat country slowly the way things did out here. First a line of fence posts, then the dark shape of outbuildings, then the main house resolving itself against the gray morning sky. It was bigger than she'd expected. Not grand, not the kind of house that was meant to impress anyone, but solid, built to last. The kind of structure that said the man who'd put it up intended to be here for a long time. The driver helped her down from the wagon without comment and left her bag at her feet and drove off toward the barn, and Lily stood in the yard of Caleb Mercer's ranch, holding her canvas bag, and waited. The door opened. Caleb Mercer was not what she'd expected. She'd built an image of him on the ride over, assembled him from pieces of the men she'd known, and feared her mother's creditors, the men who came with paperwork. She'd expected someone older. Someone who wore his power the way Forsyth wore his hat, like a statement. Caleb Mercer was 35, and he looked like a man who worked. Not managed, not supervised, worked. His hands were the hands of someone who spent more time with fence wire and timber than with documents which made no sense given what she'd seen of his documents. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and his face was the kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness, but was something more like deliberate reserve, the way a deep well looks still from the surface. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Miss Carter," he said. "It's still Miss Carter then," she said. I wasn't sure if the ceremony was meant to happen first. Something crossed his face. Not offense, not amusement exactly. Something in between. Whenever you're ready, he said, or whenever you're not. That was not what she'd expected him to say. Come inside, he said. I'll show you the room. The room was clean and it had a lock on the door. Not a lock that locked it from the outside. A lock that locked from the inside, with a key sitting on the dresser beside a plain white pitcher and basin. Lily noticed it immediately. She noticed the way the dresser was positioned facing the window, rather than the wall, so whoever sat at it in the morning would see daylight. She noticed the chair near the window had a cushion on it, not new, but not worn out either. Someone had thought about this room. Not decorated it, not prettied it up, but thought about it in the way someone thinks about making a place livable for another person. She didn't know what to do with that. Meals are at 6 and noon and 6, Caleb said from the doorway. He didn't come in. He hadn't asked to come in. He stood at the threshold and said what needed saying. You're not expected to cook unless you want to. Tom handles it. You're not expected to work the ranch. If you want to help somewhere, I won't stop you, but I won't require it. What are you requiring? Lily asked. Nothing, he said, except that you're safe here. She turned to look at him directly. She'd found that people, men especially, had difficulty holding eye contact when they were being examined honestly, and she'd learned to use it. She looked at Caleb Mercer and waited for him to flinch or shift or say something that contradicted the rest of it. He didn't. He just looked back that same careful steadiness. Everyone requires something, she said. Yes, he agreed. But not everything that's required gets said out loud right away. Then he pulled the door almost closed, and his footsteps went down the hallway, and that was the end of their first conversation. Lily locked the door. She sat on the edge of the bed with the key in her hand, and she thought about what he'd said. Not everything that's required gets said out loud right away. It could have been a warning. It could have been a threat dressed in reasonable clothes. She turned it over carefully, the way she'd turned over the question of crying the night before. It could also have been honest. She didn't know which, and not knowing was going to drive her to distraction faster than anything else. She put the key in her dress pocket where she could feel it, and she stayed in the room until she was hungry enough that the smell of food cooking from somewhere in the house became impossible to ignore. The hired man named Tom was somewhere between 50 and ancient, and he cooked the way men cooked when no one had ever told them they couldn't without ceremony or recipe, producing food that was plain and hot and filling. He set a plate in front of Lily without comment when she appeared in the kitchen, and she sat and ate without comment, and that seemed to be the acceptable mode of communication in this house. Caleb ate at the same table. He didn't make conversation. He didn't ignore her either. When she reached for the salt, he moved the pitcher out of the way so she could get to it. When she said thank you, he nodded. When she asked Tom if there was coffee, Caleb got up and poured it himself before Tom could. She watched him all through the meal. After Caleb went to the desk in the corner of the main room and opened a ledger and began writing. Lily sat by the window with her Bible in her lap, not reading it, watching him without appearing to watch him. He was careful with his work. Precise. He held the pen the way someone holds something they're not certain of, which was odd for a man who seemed certain about most other things. He wrote for a long time, and then stopped and looked at something she couldn't see, a document separate from the ledger, and the quality of his stillness changed, tightened. Then he folded the document and locked it in the desk drawer with a small key on his watch chain. Lily looked back at her Bible. She'd been in this house for less than half a day, and she'd already seen two things that didn't add up. She had the feeling she was going to keep counting. The days that followed were strange in ways she hadn't predicted. She had expected cruelty. She'd prepared for it on the wagon ride over, thought about how she would respond to it, what she would endure where the line was, that she would not cross, regardless of what it cost her. She'd expected something to happen that would confirm what she'd assumed about a man who would arrange a wife through a debt collector. What happened instead was nothing that resembled what she'd expected. Caleb Mercer did not drink. He did not raise his voice. He worked from before sunrise until after dark, and he came in dirty and tired, and he cleaned up at the pump outside, and he ate whatever Tom had made, and he went to his desk, and he read, or he wrote, and then he went to his room and shut his door. He said good morning every morning and good night every night, and in between he spoke when there was something that needed saying and was silent when there wasn't. On the third morning, she found him in the kitchen before Tom making coffee. He poured her a cup without being asked. She sat down across from him and drank it and looked at him over the rim. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect? Someone who acts like he bought something." He was quiet for a moment. The fire in the stove ticked and settled. "I didn't buy anything," he said finally. "The paper says otherwise." "The paper says a lot of things," he said. "Papers aren't always right." She set her cup down. "Then what is it that the paper got wrong?" He looked at her with that careful steadiness she was starting to recognize as his default. Then he said, "Give it time," and got up and went out to the barn. She sat with her coffee and the question he hadn't answered, and the growing certainty that the thing underneath this arrangement, the thing no one had told her, was bigger than a debt and a name on a contract. On the fifth day, she started going outside, not because she'd been told she could, but because she'd decided she was going to, and she was watching to see if Caleb would stop her or say anything about it. He didn't. He looked up from where he was mending a section of fence when she came out of the house, and he nodded and went back to his work. She walked the property. It wasn't aimless. She was mapping it in her mind, the lay of the land, the outbuildings where the hands were and weren't, which routes led where. She'd grown up on a working farm. She understood that a property told you things about the person who ran it if you paid attention. What the Mercer Ranch told her was contradictory. The operation was well run. The animals were healthy. The fences were maintained. The hands, 4 of them varying in age, worked steadily and without the sullen quality that came when men were poorly treated or badly managed. 2 of them touched their hats when she walked past. One of the younger ones, barely older than she was, said good morning with what seemed like genuine goodwill. But there were other things. There was a padlocked building at the far east edge of the property, separate from the other structures, too large for a smokehouse and the wrong shape for a stable. She looked at it for a while. A man came out while she was looking one of the hands she hadn't seen before, and he and the padlock exchanged a key, and whatever was inside went unseen. There were visitors that came in the evenings after dark, not often. But she had trouble sleeping in the unfamiliar house, and she'd hear the sound of horses and voices, low and careful, and then silence, and then the horses leaving again. She never heard what was said. And there were the documents. She hadn't forgotten the document he'd locked in the desk. She hadn't forgotten the way his stillness had changed when he looked at it. On the 7th evening, while Caleb was still out and Tom had gone to bed early with a headache, Lily stood in front of the desk for a long time. She didn't open it, not yet. She wasn't ready to know what she would do with whatever she found. She needed to be ready for that before she looked. She went to bed instead, and she lay in the dark. And she thought about what kind of man buys a wife through a debt collector and then gives her a locked room and a key she controls and coffee before she asks for it, and never once acts like he expects anything in return. There were only 2 explanations she could think of. The first was that he was running a patience long enough to eventually get something he wanted. The second was that he'd done all of this for a reason that had nothing to do with her at all. She wasn't sure which scared her more. 2 weeks in, she found the letters. Not in the desk in the barn, tucked inside a leather saddlebag hung on a post near the back stall, which she'd only found because she'd gone looking for a horse brush and the saddlebag had fallen when she bumped the post and the letters had slid out. She'd picked one up before she'd thought about whether she should. It was addressed to Caleb. No return address. The handwriting was that of someone educated but hurried. The letters pressed hard into the paper. She read the first 2 lines before she stopped herself. The first line said, "Hale has moved on the Caldwell place. 3 families gone." The second line said, You need to find a way to get inside the county office before the transfers register. Lily set the letter down. Her heart was doing something irregular. She picked up another one. This one said, "If he suspects you, everything we've built gets buried with you. Be careful who you bring into this." And then at the bottom, in different handwriting, a note that looked like Caleb's written in the margin of the letter, like an afterthought. She doesn't know. Better that way for now. Lily stared at those words for a long moment. She doesn't know. Lily put the letters back in the saddlebag, exactly as she'd found them. She was careful, she was always careful, and she left the barn and walked back to the house and went straight to her room and sat on the bed with her hands on her knees. She doesn't know. Better that way for now. The careful kindness, the locked desk, the late-night visitors, the padlocked building. The way he never acted like a man who'd bought a wife because she wasn't here for the reason she'd been told she was here. She was here for something else. She just didn't know what. Yet. She waited 3 more days. She was deliberate about it. She observed and she catalogued, and she said nothing that would tell him she'd changed what she was watching for. She ate breakfast and she walked the property, and she said good morning and good night, and she sat with her Bible by the window, and she waited. On the 3rd night, she heard voices again. Late. She'd been awake, which she was most nights now, waiting for them. She recognized the voice speaking with Caleb after a moment, low, rapid, urgent. It wasn't one of the hands. It was older, more careful, and it kept stopping and starting, like a man who was choosing each word under pressure. She heard Caleb say, "If Hale pushes the water claim through next month, the Morrison place falls next." She heard the other voice say, "We need more time. We need the Briggs to move before Hale's lawyers do." She heard Caleb say very quietly, "She's going to figure it out." A pause. "Let her," Caleb said. "Maybe that's not the worst thing." Lily pressed her back against the wall of her room and stared at the ceiling. Let her. Not stop her, not handle it. Let her. She'd signed a piece of paper that said she was a wife. She'd come to a ranch expecting cruelty and found careful silence instead. She'd found letters in a barn and a locked desk and night visitors, and a man who spoke about her to someone in the dark and said let her instead of stop her. She didn't know what she'd been walked into. But she knew this, she had not been walked into something small. She got out of bed. She dressed in the dark. She found her folding knife in her bag and put it in her pocket next to the key to her room. She sat back down on the bed, and she started planning what she was going to ask Caleb Mercer tomorrow morning before the coffee was poured, before he could get out to the barn and away from her when she had him in the same room and no way out of the question she'd been building for 2 weeks. She didn't sleep, but when the gray light came through the window, she was ready. She was at the kitchen table before he was. That was the first thing she'd calculated it the night before, lying awake in the gray dark, turning the conversation over in her mind like a stone she needed to know every side of before she picked it up. Caleb rose early. She knew his patterns now. 2 weeks of watching had given her that much. He'd be in the kitchen by 5:30 before Tom, before the hands, before the world outside this house had fully committed to being daytime. She was there at 5:15. She'd made the coffee herself, which she'd never done in this house. She knew where everything was, she'd been watching that too, and she had 2 cups poured and waiting when she heard his footsteps in the hall. He stopped when he came through the doorway. Just for a moment. Just long enough for her to see that she'd surprised him, and that he didn't surprise easily. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He looked at her, then at the cups. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat. She didn't let him say anything first. She'd decided that too. "Who is Victor Hale to you?" she asked. The quality of his stillness changed the same way it had changed when he'd looked at the document in his desk. She'd been watching for exactly that. "He's a creditor," Caleb said. "Among other things." "Among other things," she repeated. 3 families gone from the Caldwell place. That's what the letter said. Water rights being stolen across counties. A case being built. You working inside something dangerous. She paused. "That's not creditor business. That's something else." He was very still. You read my letters, he said. One fell out of a saddlebag. I read 2 lines before I stopped myself. She looked at him directly. I read enough. He picked up his coffee cup, set it down without drinking. How long have you known? 10 days. And you waited. I wanted to understand what I was asking before I asked it. She folded her hands on the table. I'm asking now. All of it. What is actually happening here, and what does any of it have to do with me? The fire in the stove, the house still and dark around them. Outside, the first birds beginning their noise in the cold morning. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, that assessing look she'd come to recognize, the one that wasn't cold so much as careful. Then he said, If I tell you, there's no untelling it. I signed a piece of paper that traded me for a debt, Lily said. I've already been told more than I should have been without being told anything at all. There's no protecting me from this. I'm already in it. Something shifted in his face. Not much, but enough. He started talking. Victor Hale had come to Dust River County 8 years ago with capital and connections, and a particular talent for identifying land that other people needed and turning that need into leverage. He ran a lending office that was legal on its face and corrupt in its bones interest rates that compounded in ways the borrowers didn't fully understand until it was too late. Foreclosure timelines that moved faster than the law was supposed to allow, and a network of local officials who'd been paid or pressured into looking the other direction. The land wasn't the end goal. That was the piece most people missed. Water, Caleb said. This whole territory runs on water rights. Whoever controls the water controls what the land is worth, what can be grown on it, whether a town survives or dries up. Hale's been buying up water claims for 6 years. Not obviously. Through third parties, through foreclosures, through paperwork that takes a lawyer to unravel. By the time most people understood what was happening, the transfers were registered and legal, and there was nothing to be done. Lily thought about the Henderson family, the mother coughing in a Billings boarding house, the father broken. How many families? She asked. In this county alone, 40-something, across the territory. He stopped. More than I can put an exact number to. And you. I came here 4 years ago, he said. I'd watched the same thing happen in 2 other counties before this one. I knew what the pattern looked like. I came here to get close enough to document it, the real documents, not the ones filed at the county office, but the ones that show how the scheme actually works. The internal transfers, the coercion records, the communications between Hale and the men he has in local government. By acting like his partner, Lily said. He nodded once. I signed agreements with him. Made myself look like someone who wanted the same things he wanted. It gave me access. And it made you look guilty of the same things. Yes. She absorbed that. And the marshal. Briggs. Caleb's expression shifted slightly. You've been paying attention. I told you I'd been watching. She leaned forward a fraction. Is Briggs someone you trust or someone you're afraid of? Both, he said. He's an honest man. That makes him valuable and dangerous in equal measure. If he investigates without the full picture, I'm the one who looks like Hale's associate. The documentation I have only makes sense if you can see the whole of it. How close are you? Close, he said. And Hale knows something is wrong. He doesn't know what. He's been watching me for the past 3 months. He paused. Which is why he pushed the arrangement with your mother's debt. The air in the kitchen changed. Lily felt it before she fully understood it, something dropping through her chest, cold and certain. He set it up, she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. He presented it as routine, a debt he held a rancher who needed a wife, a clean transaction. But Hale doesn't do anything that's just routine. Your mother's debt was small enough that he could have let it ride for another year without impact. He called it in now, and he pushed you here because... He stopped. Because why? Lily's voice was very quiet. Because a wife who doesn't know what her husband is doing can be used, Caleb said, as a witness who doesn't understand what she's witnessed. As a vulnerability. as someone who can be approached separately and told things about me that make her doubt everything she's seen. He looked at her steadily. You weren't placed here by accident. You were placed here because Hale thought you'd be a liability I couldn't control. The silence stretched. He was going to use me against you? Lily said. That was the plan. Did you know when Forsyth came with the papers, did you already know what Hale was doing? I suspected it, Caleb said. I didn't have confirmation until 2 days after you arrived. And you still let it happen. Not an accusation exactly. A fact being examined. If I'd refused the arrangement, Hale would have known I'd figured out the move. And your family would have lost the house, and you'd have been without protection in a county where Hale has reach. He held her gaze. I made a choice. I'm not asking you to think it was the right one. I'm telling you it was the one I made. Lily sat with that. She turned it over the way she'd turned over everything else methodically, without letting feeling get ahead of thinking. You gave me a room with a lock, she said. Yes. You didn't tell me what I was walking into. No. You said 2 nights ago, let her. You said it might not be the worst thing if I figured it out. He didn't ask how she'd heard that. He just said, yes. Why? The long pause again. Outside, the birds were louder now, and somewhere in the barn, one of the horses moved and settled. Because I've been doing this alone for 4 years, he said. And you'd figured out in 2 weeks what most people wouldn't have seen in a year. And because... He stopped, started again more carefully. Because you're not what Hale expected when he made his move. He expected someone frightened. Someone who could be handled. Lily looked at him. I am frightened, she said. I know, he said. That's not what I mean. She understood what he meant. She understood it, and she didn't entirely know what to do with it, so she set it aside for the moment and focused on what was concrete and manageable. The locked building, she said. East side of the property. Documents, he said. Copies of everything I've collected. Testimony from families who lost their land. Transfer records I managed to pull before they were buried. And the night visitors. People bringing more. Some of them drove 2 days to get here. She looked at her coffee. Cold now. She drank it anyway. What happens if Hale moves before you have enough to take to Briggs? Then everything I have looks like the evidence of my own guilt, he said flatly. And I go to prison, and Hale continues, and everyone who trusted me with their testimony gets nothing. How much more do you need? The county office records, he said. There are transfers that were registered without proper signatures, or with signatures that were coerced. I need those originals. Hale has a man inside the office who controls access. Who? A clerk named Garrett. He's been on Hale's payroll for 3 years. Lily nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, A woman going to the county records office to look up property filings is not unusual. Caleb went very still. A new wife wanting to understand what her husband owns, what the land is registered under, getting the lay of things. She looked up at him. Nobody looks twice at that. He stared at her. No, he said. I'm not asking, she said. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can either help me do it usefully, or you can watch me do it without your help. Either way, I'm doing it. You don't understand how dangerous. I understand exactly how dangerous, she said. I signed my name to a piece of paper because I was 18 and desperate and had no choice. I am not 18 and desperate and without choice anymore. I'm in this. You said yourself I'm already in it. She stood up from the table. Tell me what to look for. He told her. Not all of it at once. She understood why, though she didn't tell him she understood. He was a man who'd learned caution the hard way, and he wasn't going to unlearn it because she'd surprised him over a cold cup of coffee. He told her what was most essential. The names on the water transfers. The filing dates that didn't match the deed dates, the clerk's handwriting versus the notary stamps that should have accompanied it. He went over it twice. She didn't take notes, she'd told him she didn't need to, and he'd looked skeptical until she repeated back every detail in sequence. And then he'd been quiet for a moment, in a way that wasn't skepticism anymore. "You have a good memory," he said. "I had good teachers and a bad school," she said. "You learned to keep things in your head." They went over it a third time because she wanted to, not because she needed to. Then she went to her room and changed into the better of her two good dresses, and put her hair up the way her mother had taught her for church, and she looked in the small mirror above the basin and thought, "You are going into a government office to look at land records. You are a rancher's wife on ordinary business. You are nobody that anyone needs to worry about." She believed it well enough to walk out the door. Caleb was waiting in the yard with the wagon. She hadn't asked him to bring it around. He had anyway. "I'll take you to town," he said. "I have business at the feed store. Separate directions." She climbed up without taking his offered hand, not rejection, just habit, and he flicked the reins, and they went without speaking, which was their most fluent language by now. Dust River's main street was the kind of street that looked permanent from a distance and provisional up close. The county records office sat between a dry goods and a lawyer's practice, a narrow building with a wooden sign that needed repainting. Caleb stopped the wagon 3 buildings down. "If Garrett asks why you're looking at the transfers." "Curiosity about my husband's holdings," she said. "Completely natural." "If he pushes." "I'll be charming," she said. "I know how." He looked at her with an expression she was coming to recognize, the one where he was deciding whether to say something or hold it back. He held it back. She got down from the wagon and walked to the records office without looking back. Garrett was younger than she'd expected. Mid-20s, soft around the edges, in the way of a man who sat behind a desk with small, careful eyes that moved over her once when she came in and then moved back to his papers. "Help you?" he said. "I hope so." She smiled the particular smile her mother had taught her that was warm without being inviting. "I'm Lily Mercer. My husband has land registered in this county, and I've been trying to get a clear picture of the property holdings, deeds, water claims, that kind of thing. He works so much he never gets around to walking me through the paperwork, and I like to understand things properly." Garrett's eyes moved over her again. "What name?" "Mercer. Caleb Mercer, north of town 16 miles. He got up from his desk without enthusiasm and went to the filing shelves along the back wall. She watched the way he moved where his eyes went, what he touched where he hesitated. He pulled a folder and brought it to the counter. "These are the current registered holdings under Mercer," he said. "Deeds and grazing rights. And water claims." The pause was barely there. A half-beat. "Separate filing," he said. "Let me get those." He went back to the shelves. While his back was turned, Lily leaned over the open folder on the counter. She wasn't taking anything. She was reading. Fast, the way she read everything, running her eye down dates and signatures and notary stamps. She found the first discrepancy in 30 seconds. A transfer dated March of 1871. Notary stamp from an office in Helena. But the signature beneath it, the one that was supposed to be the county registrar's, was wrong. The pen pressure was different. She'd seen enough of a man's handwriting to know when it wasn't that man's. She had it memorized before Garrett turned back around. She went through 3 more documents the same way while he was answering her careful questions. She kept him talking. She'd learned that early people showed you more when their mouths were busy. She was warm and slightly helpless, and deeply curious about things that seemed harmlessly domestic, and he was off his guard by the time she thanked him and said she'd likely need to come back once she'd had a chance to discuss things with her husband. "Of course," he said. She was halfway to the door when he said, "Mrs. Mercer." She turned. "Your husband know you're here," he said. It was said lightly, but the small, careful eyes weren't light at all. "He brought me to town himself," she said. "Why?" He shook his head. "Just making conversation," he said. She walked back to the wagon with her spine straight and her hands loose at her sides and her heart hitting hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Caleb was at the feed store as promised. She went there directly, walked through the door, and found him at the counter and stood next to him and said in a completely level voice, "We need to talk before we go home." He looked at her face. He understood what it meant. 2 minutes. he said to the man behind the counter, and followed her to the back of the store, where the stacked bags of grain made a wall between them and the door. 4 discrepancies, she said low and quick. March 1871, August 1871, January and April of 1872. The notary stamps don't match the signatures. Somebody was signing those transfers who wasn't the registrar, and the stamps were added afterward. The ink sits differently. He stared at her. And Garrett asked me if you knew I was there, she said. He was fishing. He's going to tell someone. Caleb's expression had gone to a place she hadn't seen before. Not the careful stillness, but something tighter. Alert in the way of a man recalculating quickly. How confident are you about the signatures? He said. Completely, she said. I've looked at enough handwriting to know what it means when it changes. Those aren't the same hand. Would you recognize them again? Could you write down what you saw? I already have it. She tapped the side of her head. All of it. He looked at her for a moment that held something she couldn't fully name. Then he said, We need to get back. Tonight, I'm going to need you to write down everything, every date, every detail. Exactly as you saw it. I know, she said. I know what I'm doing. I'm starting to believe that, he said. And it came out different than anything he'd said to her before. They didn't speak on the ride back. But the silence was different from what it had been before. It wasn't the silence of 2 strangers in an arrangement neither of them chose. It was the silence of 2 people who had crossed into something together and were still figuring out what to call the place they'd arrived. That night, she sat at the desk, his desk, and he'd pulled a second chair up without being asked, and she wrote everything down. Dates, names, filing numbers, the specific way the ink varied between signatures and stamps. She wrote for nearly 2 hours, and Caleb sat beside her reading what she produced occasionally, asking a question, occasionally going to the locked cabinet by the wall and pulling out a document to cross-reference. At some point, Tom put food on the table, and they ate without stopping the work, which was the most normal thing she'd felt since arriving. This one, Caleb said, pointing to the March 1871 entry. I have a witness who was present at the original filing. He said the registrar was never in the room. The signature was added 3 days later by someone else. He saw it happen, but he was afraid to come forward. Is he still afraid? He's less afraid than he was, Caleb said. He came here 2 weeks ago. He's one of the night visitors. Lily looked at the document in front of her. If we have his testimony and the signature discrepancy, that's 2 proofs of the same fraud. It's the pattern, Caleb said. That's what Briggs needs. Not one document, the pattern. Show him that this happened the same way across 40 different transfers, and it stops looking like a clerical error and starts looking like what it is. How soon can we bring it to him? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Hale is filing a new claim next month, the Morrison place. If we don't have Briggs moving before that registers one more family. Loses everything, she finished. Yes. She looked at the stack of documents, at the testimony records, at 2 years of careful, dangerous work laid out across a desk in a lamplit room in a ranch house 16 miles north of a town where a clerk named Garrett had already sent word to someone that Lily Mercer had been asking questions. She knew that. She was almost certain of it, and it meant the timeline had just changed. We don't have until next month, she said. Caleb looked at her. Garrett is going to tell Hale I was in that office, she said. Hale is going to think about why. He's going to start wondering if his move putting me here produced something he didn't expect. How long before he acts on that? Caleb said nothing, but his jaw tightened in the particular way she'd learned meant he was confronting something he'd already considered and didn't want to say out loud. Days, she said. Not weeks, days. He didn't disagree. She looked at the lamp, at the shadows it threw across the stacked papers, at all of it. Then we need to be ready, she said, and we need to do it right. She picked up her pen. Tell me about the Morrison family, she said. Tell me everything. Because if we're doing this, we're doing it for them too, not just for the documents. He told her. It was well past midnight when they finally stopped. The lamp was low, and Tom had long since gone to bed, and the house was quiet around them. Lily's hand ached from writing, and her eyes were tired, and she felt more awake than she had in 2 weeks. She gathered the pages she'd written and set them on the pile Caleb indicated, and he locked them in the cabinet and turned back to her with the key in his hand and something in his face that she hadn't seen there before. "You should know," he said carefully, "that you have changed what's possible here." She looked at him. "I should know more than that," she said, "but I'll start with that." He almost smiled. She saw the faint movement at the corner of his mouth, and it surprised her more than anything had since she'd arrived. She picked up the lamp and went down the hallway to her room and locked the door behind her, the key still in her pocket where it always was, and she sat on the bed and looked at her hands in the low light. She'd come here 8 days ago thinking this was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. She'd signed a piece of paper and been traded like an entry in a ledger, and she'd expected cruelty and found something else instead. What she hadn't expected was to find a fight worth being in. She wasn't sure when that had changed, but lying back on the bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling of a room in a house that wasn't hers and a life she hadn't chosen, she felt something settle into place in her chest. She wasn't here because she'd had no choice. Not anymore. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Lily knew it was from Hale before Caleb said a word about it. She could tell by the way he came in from the yard and set it on the table instead of opening it, the way a man sets down something he already knows is a problem. He stood looking at it for a moment, and then he picked it up and opened it and read it, and his face did the thing where it went very still. "What does it say?" she asked. He handed it to her without speaking. The letter was short. 4 sentences. Victor Hale's handwriting was precise and small. The writing of a man who chose every word carefully and wanted you to know it. "Mr. Mercer, I understand your new wife paid a visit to the county records office last week. I hope she found everything in order. I'd be glad to meet with you both at your earliest convenience to discuss the status of our mutual arrangements. There are matters I believe we should clarify before they become complicated." Lily read it twice. Then she set it down. "He's not asking," she said. "No," Caleb said. "He's not." "How long before he stops sending letters and starts sending something else?" Caleb pulled out the chair across from her and sat. He put his hands flat on the table, a gesture she'd come to recognize as him physically anchoring himself before saying something difficult. "I've been trying to calculate that since yesterday." "Yesterday. Garrett sent word the same evening you were in his office," he said. "I found out through one of the hands who has a brother in town. I didn't tell you because I was still working out what it meant." Lily looked at him steadily. "Don't do that again." He held her gaze. "Fair," he said. "So we have less time than we thought last night," she said. "Significantly less." She stood up and went to the window, not to look out of it, just to move, because sitting still when her mind was running this fast felt impossible. "If Hale comes here before we get to Briggs, then this conversation happens on his terms, not ours," Caleb said. "And on his terms, I look like a man whose wife went snooping in government records and found things her husband told her to find. It confirms his suspicion without giving us any room to." "Then we go to Briggs today," she said. "Lily. Today, Caleb." She turned around. "Not when we have more. What we have now is enough to open a conversation with an honest marshal. You said yourself that's what he needs, the pattern. We have the pattern. We have testimony. We have 4 signature discrepancies I documented with my own eyes and can testify to under oath." She paused. "What are we waiting for?" He was quiet for a moment that felt like a decision being made. "The Morrison deed," he said. "There's a copy I've been trying to get for 3 months. If I can get that one document, the chain of evidence is complete, beginning to end, same method documented across 6 years. Without it, what we have is strong. With it, it's undeniable." "Where is it?" "With a woman named Clara Dodd," he said. "She was Ruth Morrison's neighbor. Ruth gave it to her for safekeeping when Hale's men started coming around. Clara lives 12 miles east on a property that hasn't been touched yet, probably because she's a widow, and Hale doesn't think she has anything worth taking. Does she know you? She knows of me, he said. She doesn't trust me. Lily picked up the letter from the table and looked at it one more time. Then she set it down face down like closing a door. She'll talk to another woman, Lily said. Caleb looked at her. Tell me how to find her. He didn't like it. She could see that clearly, the particular kind of not liking it that came not from doubt in her, but from the instinct of a man who'd spent 4 years protecting something fragile from every direction and wasn't comfortable adding another moving piece. She understood it. She didn't argue with it. She just waited while he worked through it because she'd learned that Caleb Mercer came to the right conclusion eventually if you gave him the space to get there. East Road, he said finally. 12 miles. White fence at the property line, Cedar Grove behind the house. She'll have a dog that barks but doesn't bite. What do I tell her? The truth, he said. All of it. She's heard enough half-truths from enough men. If you go in there with anything less than the full story, she'll put you off the property. And if she doesn't give me the deed, then we go to Briggs with what we have and we hope it's enough. He stood up. I'll have the horse saddled. I can saddle a horse, she said. I know you can, he said. Let me do something. She almost smiled at that. Almost. The ride to Clara Dodd's took just over 2 hours. Lily had learned Montana territory the way she'd learned everything, by paying close attention to what other people thought wasn't worth noticing. The land out here had a way of looking empty that was a kind of lie. There was always something happening in it if you knew where to look. She was thinking about Caleb for most of the ride, not in the way she'd trained herself not to think, not about the fact that she'd noticed in the past week the way the lamplight fell across his face when he was reading, or the particular way he said her name when he was about to disagree with her, shorter and more deliberate than when he was just talking. She wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about what he'd told her. About 4 years. About doing it alone. She'd asked him once the week before whether there was anyone who knew the full picture. Anyone who'd been in it from the beginning. There was a man, he'd said. A lawyer from Billings. He helped me structure the early documentation. A pause. Hale found out about him. She hadn't asked what that meant. The way he'd said it told her. 4 years alone, carrying something that could get him killed in a county where the law might not be fast enough to help him building a case piece by piece, while the man he was building it against got stronger. And then, Victor Hale, calculating and precise, had sent an 18-year-old girl to undermine him. She thought about that a lot. About what Hale had expected, a frightened girl, disoriented and easily managed, who could be approached separately and told lies about her husband. A tool. She thought about the fact that Caleb had accepted the arrangement, knowing all of that. Had given her a room with a lock and said nothing she didn't ask for, and waited. She still wasn't certain what to do with that. But it sat in her differently now than it had 2 weeks ago. Clara Dodd answered her door with the expression of a woman who'd opened it too many times to find trouble and had stopped being surprised by it. She was somewhere in her 60s, spare and straight-backed, with the kind of face that had been handsome once, and was now something better, a face that knew things. The dog barked twice, and then sat down and looked at Lily with profound indifference. "Mrs. Dodd," Lily said. "My name is Lily Mercer. I'm married to Caleb Mercer north of Dust River. I'm here because Ruth Morrison gave you something to keep safe, and I need your help understanding if we're finally in a position to use it." Clara looked at her for a long moment, not hostile measuring. "You'd better come in," she said. Clara made tea and set it on the table between them and sat across from Lily and said, "Tell me why I should trust you." "You probably shouldn't based on what you know right now," Lily said. "So let me tell you more." She talked for 40 minutes. She told Clara everything: the debt, the signing the locked room with the key, the letters in the saddlebag, the conversation in the kitchen before sunrise, what she'd found in the county records office, and what Garrett's eyes had looked like when he'd asked her if her husband knew she was there. the letter that had arrived that morning with its 4 careful sentences. Clara listened without interrupting. She drank her tea, and she listened with the quality of attention that belongs to people who've learned that the details other people skip over are usually the most important ones. When Lily finished, Clara said, "He gave you a room with a key." "Yes." "First night?" "Yes." Clara was quiet. She turned her cup in her hands. "Ruth Morrison came to me in October," she said. She was 2 weeks from losing everything. She had the deed to her family's property. Her father had registered it 40 years ago, before Hale ever set foot in this territory. She said the new registration filed at the county office listed the water rights under a different name. She didn't know how it happened. She was there herself for the original filing, and it was done right. Clara set down her cup. "She gave me the original deed because she was afraid of what would happen to it if she kept it." "And what happened to Ruth?" Lily asked, though she thought she already knew. "She's in Billings," Clara said. 3 children and no land, and nothing to show for 40 years of her family's work. Her voice was even, but her eyes weren't. "She writes to me sometimes. She asks if anything's changed." Lily thought about her mother's voice. "Sign it, or we lose the house." "I'd like to be able to write back to her," Lily said, "and tell her something has." Clara looked at her for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. Something in the stove shifted and settled. Then Clara stood up and went to the back room and came back with a folded document that had been wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a piece of cord that had been knotted many times and untied and knotted again, the way things are handled when they're taken out and looked at and put away with the hope that the looking means something. She set it on the table in front of Lily. "You take that to someone who can do something with it," Clara said. "Not someone who can lose it. Someone who can use it." "We're going to Marshal Briggs," Lily said. "Today, if I can make it back in time." "Briggs," Clara said the name with the careful neutrality of someone who hadn't decided whether to trust it yet. "He's honest." "That's what I've been told." "Honest isn't always enough," Clara said. "No," Lily said. "But it's where you have to start." She took the deed. She wrapped it in the oilcloth the way Clara had had it and tucked it inside her coat against her body, where she'd feel it for every mile of the 12 miles back. At the door, Clara put her hand on Lily's arm. "How old are you?" 18, Lily said. Clara looked at her with an expression that was complicated and tired, and something else underneath, something that might have been the cousin of hope. "Lord," she said quietly, and let her go. She was 6 miles from the ranch when she heard the horse behind her. She didn't look back immediately. She slowed, slightly adjusted her coat, calculated the distance to the ranch, and the distance to town, and the distance between her and whoever was behind her. Then she looked back. 2 riders, moving faster than casual travel, closing the gap with the particular purposefulness of men who knew where they were going. She recognized neither of them, but she recognized the way they rode. She pushed her horse to a canter. They matched it. She thought about the deed against her ribs. She thought about Caleb's desk and the locked cabinet and 4 years of careful work. She thought about Clara Dodd's hand on her arm and Ruth Morrison in a boarding house in Billings, writing letters she didn't know if anyone would answer. She pushed her horse to a full gallop. The ranch came into view at the end of a long stretch, and she rode into the yard harder than she'd ridden anything in her life, and Caleb was out of the barn before she'd even fully stopped. He'd heard her coming. She realized he'd been watching the road. 2 riders, she said, swinging down. "Behind me, half a mile." He looked past her. His expression did the thing it did now when he was moving fast inside while standing still outside. "Inside," he said. "Now." "I have the deed," she said, pulling it from her coat. "Clara gave it to me." He took it and looked at her, and something crossed his face that she couldn't have named but recognized as significant. "Inside," he said again. "Both of us." The 2 riders stopped at the property line. They didn't come in. They sat there for a few minutes, visible from the window. Lily wasn't looking out of it. She was standing back from it, watching Caleb watch them, and then they turned and rode back toward town. The silence after they left was different from comfortable silence. "Hale's men," she asked, "or someone Garrett sent?" He set the deed on the desk with the care of someone handling something irreplaceable. "It doesn't matter which. It means he knows you went somewhere today, and he'll find out where, and by tomorrow he'll know you talked to Clara." "And Clara? I'll send someone to her tonight," he said. "She won't be left exposed." Lily sat down. Her legs, she realized, had been running on something that wasn't quite calm for the past hour, and now that she'd stopped, they were informing her of this. "We go to Briggs tomorrow morning," she said. "Yes." "With everything?" "Yes." He looked at the deed, at the cabinet, at the organized record of 4 years. "We go with everything." She nodded. She put her hands on the table and looked at them. Her right hand still had ink on the side of it from writing the night before. "Caleb," she said. "Yes. What happens if it isn't enough? If Briggs looks at all of it and decides he needs more before he'll move?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he'd already considered it. "Then we give him more," he said. "But I don't think that's what happens." "What do you think happens?" He came around to her side of the table and sat in the chair beside her instead of across from her, which was new. She noticed it. He looked at the documents and then at her. "I think Briggs has been waiting for something solid," he said. "He's heard rumors. He knows the shape of what's happening, but he's been a lawman long enough to know that rumors don't hold up in a federal proceeding. He needs documentation, and he needs testimony, and he needs someone who can stand up in front of a judge and say, 'I saw this with my own eyes, and I will swear to it.'" He looked at her directly. "That's us now. That's what today means." She held his gaze. "And Hale. Hale moves fast when he's cornered," Caleb said. "That's the part I'm not certain of. The moment Briggs opens an official investigation, Hale will know. He has enough reach in this county that we can't keep it quiet. And when he knows—" He stopped. "He'll try to make the evidence go away," Lily said. "Or the people who collected it." "Yes." She looked at the cabinet. "Is there somewhere else we can move the documents tonight? Somewhere that isn't this house?" He thought for a moment. "There's a man in town, retired judge. He has no connection to Hale and he doesn't like him, which isn't the same thing as being willing to stick his neck out, but he's got a safe in his office that's better than what I have here." "Take them there tonight," she said. "Before anyone has time to plan anything." He stood up. He started gathering documents with the efficiency of someone who'd imagined this contingency. She moved to the other side of the desk and helped him. They worked side by side for 20 minutes, assembling 4 years into a portable record. She held things while he wrapped them. She organized by date while he found the oilcloth. Their hands moved around each other in the small space without collision, with the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms without noticing they were doing it. He stopped once and looked at what she was holding, a stack of letters, 15 or 20, from families across 4 counties. "Read one," he said, "so you know what it is." She looked at him. He nodded. She opened the top letter. It was from a man named Samuel Pruitt from a place called Antler Creek, dated November 1872. His handwriting was unsteady, the handwriting of someone not accustomed to letters pressing hard to make each word clear. "We had that land 30 years. My father broke the first ground on it. When they came with the papers, I didn't understand what I was signing because nobody explained it, and the man who was supposed to explain it was one of Hale's. My wife cried for 3 days. My oldest boy hasn't spoken proper since. I don't know who reads this. I just know that somebody should." Lily folded the letter carefully and put it back with the others. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Caleb left at dusk with the documents wrapped in saddlebags, and 2 of the hands riding with him, men she'd come to know well enough to understand they were the ones he trusted most. She watched from the doorway until they disappeared into the falling dark. Tom made supper. She ate without tasting it. She was washing the dishes when she heard a knock at the door. Not the front door, the side door near the kitchen. 3 knocks, deliberate and spaced. She set down the plate she was holding. She thought about the folding knife in her room. She thought about the 2 riders on the road. "Who's there?" she said. Not loudly. Loudly enough. "Name's Briggs," said the voice on the other side. "Marshal Owen Briggs. I'm alone and I'm unarmed if it makes you easier. I need to speak with whoever's home." Lily stood very still for 3 seconds. Then she dried her hands on the dishcloth. She opened the door. Marshal Owen Briggs was a tall man, somewhere in his 50s, with a face that had the same quality as Clara Dodd's, a face that knew things. He wore his badge, but his hands were away from his body in the deliberate manner of a man making good on his word about the unarmed part. He looked at her. "Mrs. Mercer." "Yes," she said. "My husband isn't here." "I know," he said. "I saw him heading toward town. I figured I'd come by before he got to wherever he was going." He paused. "Ma'am, I'm going to be honest with you because I think this situation calls for it. I've had my eye on Victor Hale for 2 years. I've had my eye on your husband for 6 months. And I came here tonight because 2 of Hale's men came through Dust River this afternoon and filed a complaint with my deputy." Lily felt something cold move through her. "What kind of complaint?" "They're claiming Caleb Mercer is involved in fraudulent land transfers," Briggs said. "They're claiming they have documentation." He looked at her steadily. "And I need to know Mrs. Mercer before I do anything else with that claim, whether I should believe it." The silence stretched between them. Lily thought about the letter she'd read. "I don't know who reads this. I just know that somebody should." She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "Sit down. I'm going to tell you everything. And then I'm going to tell you what Caleb has spent 4 years trying to get to you safely." Briggs looked at her for a moment, the same measuring look Clara had given her, the look of someone deciding. He came inside. She put water on for coffee, and she sat across from him at the kitchen table, and she started at the beginning, and she didn't stop until she'd given him all of it. Everything she'd seen. Everything she'd documented, every name and date and discrepancy. And when she finished, Marshal Owen Briggs sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment, and then looked at her and said, "How long have you been in this county?" 3 weeks, she said. He let out a slow breath. "Lord Almighty," he said softly. "That's more or less what Clara Dodd said," Lily told him. He looked at her with something that had surprise in it and other things underneath. "You've spoken to Clara Dodd." "Today. I brought back a deed she's been keeping safe for Ruth Morrison." She paused. "The Morrison place is the next one Hale means to take. Next month." Briggs nodded slowly. The way a man nods when pieces he's been holding separately are finally showing him the shape of the whole. "When Caleb gets back tonight," he said, "tell him I need to speak with him first thing tomorrow, not in town, here." He glanced toward the door. "And tell him to keep his documents close." "They're already somewhere safe," Lily said. Briggs looked at her again. "Whose idea was that?" She didn't answer. He almost smiled. "Tell him to be here at sunrise," he said. "I'll come alone." He put on his hat and went to the door and then stopped with his hand on the frame. "Mrs. Mercer, Hale's complaint with my deputy, the one claiming your husband is involved in fraud." "What about it?" she said. "He included your name," Briggs said. "Said you accessed government records without proper authority." Lily held his gaze without flinching. "I went to the county records office as a property owner's wife and looked at public filings," she said. "That's not improper authority. That's called being informed." Briggs held her gaze for a moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "That's what I thought." Then he left and the door closed, and Lily stood in the kitchen in the sudden quiet and let herself feel for just a moment the weight of everything that had been set in motion. She thought about the paper she'd signed 3 weeks ago, the pen shaking in her hand, the things she'd said that no one had listened to. "I am not property." She picked up the dish she'd set down, and she finished washing it, and she waited for Caleb to come home. She had things to tell him, And for the first time since she'd arrived in this house, she had the feeling that what happened next was something they were going to decide together, not something that was going to be decided for her, around her, in spite of her. That feeling was new. She intended to keep it. Caleb came home at 10:30. She heard the horses in the yard, and she was at the door before he'd dismounted, which she hadn't planned. Her body had moved before her mind caught up with it. He handed the reins to one of the hands and came toward the house and stopped when he saw her face. "What happened?" he said. "Briggs was here," she said. "Come inside." He didn't ask anything else. He came in and she closed the door, and they stood in the kitchen, and she told him everything. The knock at the side door, the marshal's words, Hale's complaint with the deputy, her name on it, all of it. She told it the way she'd learned to tell things fast in sequence, nothing omitted. Caleb listened with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment that had a particular quality to it. Not the processing quiet, not the calculating quiet, but something underneath both of those. "He put your name on it," Caleb said. "Yes." "Hale filed a complaint naming you specifically." "Yes." Something moved across his face that she hadn't seen there before. It wasn't the careful stillness. It was something older and less managed. "He's trying to make you afraid," Caleb said. "If you're afraid, you stop. If you stop, whatever you've gathered stops mattering." "I know what he's doing," Lily said, "and I need you to know that it isn't working. But I need you to also know." She paused, chose carefully. "I need to know that you're not going to try to protect me out of this. That you're not going to decide I've gotten close enough, and now it's time to keep me back." He looked at her for a long moment. "Is that what you think I'd do?" he said. "I think it's what you'd want to do," she said. "I'm asking you not to." The fire in the stove, the house quiet around them. He uncrossed his arms. "Briggs at sunrise," he said. "Yes." "Then we should sleep." He moved toward the hallway and then stopped. He turned back partway, not quite looking at her. "Lily, Hale naming you, that changes the risk calculation. Not enough to stop, but enough that I want you to know I'm aware of it." She nodded once. "I'm aware of it too," she said. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night," he said, and went to his room. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after he'd gone. Then she went to hers, and this time she didn't lie awake. She was asleep before the lamp had fully cooled. Briggs arrived at sunrise, as promised, alone on a gray horse he tied at the fence without ceremony. Lily had coffee ready. Tom, reading the room with the instinct of a man who'd worked for Caleb long enough to understand when something serious was unfolding, made himself scarce without being asked. The three of them sat at the kitchen table. Briggs had brought nothing with him. No papers, no deputy, nothing official, and that was itself a kind of statement about how he was approaching this. Caleb laid out the full case in the way she'd come to know. He did things methodical, unflinching, nothing softened. He explained the structure of Hale's scheme, the water rights network, the county office, infiltration, the coerced transfers. He named names. He gave dates. Every claim he made he had documentation for, and he placed it in front of Briggs as he went. The copies he'd moved to the retired judge's safe last night, which Briggs had apparently already deduced, because he didn't ask about provenance. Briggs listened the way he'd listened to Lily the night before, fully, without interrupting. When Caleb finished, Briggs picked up the Morrison deed, Clara Dodd's oilcloth-wrapped document, and looked at it for a long time. "This is the original registration," he said. 40 years old." "Yes," Caleb said. "The transfer filed at the county office in January of last year claims the water rights were never part of the original deed. That's a lie. You're holding the proof of the lie." Briggs set it down carefully. He looked at Lily. "You documented the signature discrepancies yourself." 4 of them," she said. "March and August of 1871, January and April of 1872. The notary stamps don't match the signatures on the same documents. Someone was adding stamps to signatures they didn't witness. Could you identify those discrepancies again in a formal setting? Yes, she said. I could identify them anywhere. Briggs folded his hands on the table. He was quiet for a moment that felt like a man putting his full weight on something to test whether it would hold. Hale's complaint against your husband was filed at my office yesterday evening, he said. Formally. That means I have to respond to it. Officially, I'm obligated to investigate Caleb Mercer. He let that sit for a moment. Unofficially, what that means is that I now have a legal reason to request documents from the county office. Formally. In a way that Garrett cannot refuse without obstructing a marshal's investigation. Caleb looked at him. You're going to use his complaint against him. I'm going to do my job, Briggs said evenly, which includes investigating all relevant parties. He looked between the two of them. But I need to ask you something first, and I need an honest answer, both of you. Ask, Lily said. How many people know what you've been building here? Briggs said. Not the families with testimony. I mean people who know the full scope, who have seen everything. Before last night, Caleb said. No one living. Briggs absorbed that. The lawyer from Billings. Yes. Hale found out about him, Briggs said. It wasn't a question. Yes. So Hale knows you've been working on this. He doesn't know how far along you are. He doesn't know about Mrs. Mercer's role. He doesn't know you have the Morrison deed. Briggs tapped the table once lightly. That's your window. Once he knows Briggs is officially examining county records, he's going to move fast to get those documents out of that office or destroyed. We have, he calculated, maybe 48 hours before Garrett does something irreversible. Then what do we do with 48 hours? Lily said. Briggs looked at her with the expression she was learning meant he was reassessing something. Mrs. Mercer, I need to formally request your testimony. Written, signed, witnessed. The signature discrepancies you observed, that's eyewitness evidence of document fraud. Combined with the Morrison deed and Caleb's network documentation, it forms a federal case, not just a county matter. He paused. But I need to tell you both what that means. Tell us, Caleb said. A federal investigation means this goes above Victor Hale's reach in this county, Briggs said. He can't buy or threaten his way out of federal scrutiny the same way he can manage local officials. But it also means that once it begins, it cannot be quiet. He will know, he will react, and the people who are part of this, he looked at Lily, are going to need to be somewhere that isn't easy to get to. The room was still. You're telling us to be ready to move, Lily said. I'm telling you to be prepared, he said. Yes. Caleb looked at the documents on the table. At 4 years of his life, spread across the kitchen table, in a house that wasn't safe anymore. Then he looked at Lily. She nodded. Tell us what you need from us, Caleb said to Briggs. And tell us in what order. They worked through the morning. Briggs stayed 4 hours, during which Lily wrote out her formal testimony in full, every document she'd seen, every discrepancy. She'd noted the dates, the filing numbers, the specific nature of each irregularity. Briggs witnessed it and signed beneath her name and folded it into the inside of his coat with the care of something he intended to keep on his person. Caleb produced the network documentation in organized sequence, and Briggs went through it piece by piece with the thorough attention of a man who'd been waiting for exactly this and was not going to rush it now that it was in front of him. At one point, Briggs read the Pruitt letter. Samuel Pruitt, Antler Creek, November 1872. The unsteady handwriting of a man pressing hard to make each word clear. He read it without comment, set it in the pile. His face said nothing. But he took a breath through his nose that was not entirely steady, and Lily noticed it, and she thought, good. Good that it costs him something. It should cost everyone something. When Briggs finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. The families who gave testimony, he said to Caleb. Anyone Hale might know about. 2 of them, Caleb said. I've been careful, but Hale has informants I haven't been able to identify. Names. Caleb gave them. Briggs wrote them in a small notebook, tore the page out, and pocketed it. I'll have someone ride to them today, he said, quietly. And Clara Dodd, Lily said. Already taken care of, Briggs said. I sent someone last night after I left here. Lily looked at him. You were already moving before this morning. Mrs. Mercer, Briggs said. I've been waiting 2 years for someone to bring me something solid enough to stand on. When you sat down across from me last night and started talking, I wasn't going home and doing nothing. He put on his hat. Be ready to move by tomorrow evening. Don't wait for someone to tell you it's time. If something feels wrong, assume it is. He left. The sound of his horse faded. Lily and Caleb stood in the kitchen with the evidence of everything they'd built spread across the table between them and the particular silence of people who have set something irrevocable in motion. He's right about the timeline, Caleb said. Yes. If we need to leave. I know, she said. I'm not afraid of leaving. She looked at him. Are you? He looked around the kitchen. Not at anything specific, just at it. At the house he'd built or bought or made into something he'd lived in for 4 years while he carried what he carried. No, he said. I've been ready to leave it for a long time. She believed him. She also didn't entirely believe him, but she let it stand. I need to write to my mother, she said, to let her know. She stopped. To let her know something has changed. Write to her, he said, but don't say where she should write back to yet. She nodded. She understood. She wrote the letter at the desk where she'd written everything else, and it was the hardest thing she'd written in weeks. Harder than the testimony, harder than the discrepancy record, because the testimony had been about facts and her mother was not a fact. Her mother was the woman who'd pressed a key into a paper and said sign it, and then stood at the table with biscuits she'd made because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. She wrote, I am well. I am doing something that matters. I will explain when I can explain it fully. Don't be afraid for me. I am not afraid. She sealed it and addressed it and gave it to Tom to post in town, and she stood at the window after he'd gone and thought about her mother reading it in the kitchen of the house that was still standing because of a paper Lily had signed. And she thought about whether that was a fair trade, and she decided it was a question she was going to keep asking herself for a long time without settling on an answer. She was still at the window when she heard a wagon on the road. Not Caleb's, he was in the barn. Not Tom's, she'd watched him go. A different sound. 2 horses moving at the pace of something that wasn't in a hurry but had decided exactly where it was going. She watched from the window. The wagon stopped at the gate. 2 men she didn't recognize. One of them got down and walked to the gate and looked at the house for a moment, then walked back and said something to the man still on the seat, and they waited. Lily went to find Caleb. He was at the back of the barn, and she said his name once at normal volume, and he looked at her face and put down what he was holding. 2 men, she said. At the gate, just sitting. He came with her. He looked from the barn door without showing himself. I don't know them, he said. Hales? Maybe. Or Garrett sent someone. Or... He stopped. Stay here. Caleb. For 3 minutes, he said. Let me see what they want before we decide anything. She didn't like it. She stayed. He walked out to the gate with the unhurried quality of a man who owned the property and had every right to ask questions about who was standing on the edge of it. She watched from the barn door. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read its shape. Caleb relaxed, asking the 2 men, answering one of them, handing something down from the wagon seat. A letter. Caleb took it, said something. The men turned the wagon and left. He came back to the barn and opened the letter and read it, and his face went through several things quickly. She hadn't seen him do that before. What is it? She said. He handed her the letter. It was short. The handwriting was thin and hurried, the writing of someone's older hand. Not Hale's precise script, something shakier, more urgent. Mercer. My name is James Whitfield. I am a County Commissioner, District 4. I have been on Victor Hale's payroll for 3 years. I want out. I have records of every payment he made to county officials, including the county registrar. I kept copies of everything because I was afraid. I am still afraid. But I am more afraid of what happens if this continues. Tell me who to bring these to, and I will bring them. J. Whitfield. Lily read it twice. Then she looked up. This is either exactly what it looks like, she said, or it's Hale trying to find out who we're working with. Caleb's jaw was tight. Yes. How do we tell which? We can't, he said. Not for certain. Not without meeting him. If we meet him, and he's Hale's, then Hale knows we're working with Briggs, he said. Which he's going to find out tomorrow when Briggs requests the county records anyway. She thought about that. So the question isn't whether we risk Hale knowing. The question is whether Whitfield's records are real. Yes. Payment records to the county registrar, she said. That's the piece we don't have. We have the fraudulent signatures, and we have testimony, and we have the Morrison deed, but we don't have direct evidence of the money changing hands. Without that, Hale's lawyers argue that the document irregularities were clerical errors. Caleb looked at her. I know. If Whitfield is real, his records close that gap. If, he said. She handed the letter back to him. She made a decision in the time it took to do that she felt it happen clean and clear, the way real decisions feel different from considered ones. Send Briggs the letter, she said. Tonight before we respond to Whitfield. If Briggs knows Whitfield, or knows of him, that tells us something. If he doesn't, it still tells us something. She paused. Don't meet Whitfield without Briggs knowing. But don't turn him away either. Caleb looked at her with the expression she'd first seen over a cold cup of coffee at 5 a.m, the one where something was shifting in the way he was seeing her. Yes, he said. That's exactly right. Briggs received the letter that evening through one of Caleb's most trusted hands. His response came back within 2 hours, which told Lily something about the marshal's state of readiness. The response said, Whitfield is real. I've suspected him of involvement with Hale for 2 years. If he's turning his records, could be the end of this. Meet him somewhere neutral. I'll have a man nearby. Don't go alone. Caleb read it and passed it to Lily. Neutral ground, she said. He'll suggest the church in town. That's what people use out here when they need somewhere that feels safe. How do you know that? Clara Dodd told me, she said. She said half the county's most serious business gets done in that vestibule. He almost smiled again. She was keeping count of those. They sent word to Whitfield. The meeting was set for the following noon. That night, neither of them slept easily. She could tell the house had a quality past midnight, the particular stillness of 2 people in separate rooms, not sleeping. She lay in the dark and thought about all of it, the whole chain of it. And she thought about what Briggs had said, be ready to move. And she thought about Caleb in the kitchen that morning, looking at the room with the almost wistfulness of a man saying goodbye to something. Without admitting, that was what he was doing. She got up at 2 a.m. and went to the kitchen and put water on because she needed something to do with her hands. He came in 10 minutes later. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything about not sleeping. She poured 2 cups. They sat. I've been thinking about Whitfield, she said. So have I. If his record showed direct payment to the registrar, we can tie every fraudulent transfer to a deliberate act, not a clerical error. Hale can't explain that away. She wrapped both hands around her cup. This could be done. Tomorrow, it could actually be done. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Yes. Does that feel the way you thought it would feel? She asked. He looked at her. The question surprised him, she could see it. He thought about it genuinely, the way he thought about things that deserved an honest answer. No, he said. I thought it would feel like relief. Mostly I feel... He stopped. Afraid it won't work, she said. Yes, and... Another stop. Aware that I don't want to be doing this alone. She held his gaze. You're not, she said. He looked at her with the full weight of that, not at what it meant practically, but at what it meant in the space between two people sitting in a kitchen at 2 in the morning after 3 weeks of something neither of them had a clean name for. "Lily," he said. "Don't say anything about the arrangement," she said. "Don't tell me that the paper shouldn't matter. I already know that." He waited. "I just want to know," she said carefully, "whether after this is over, after Briggs has what he needs, and Hale is finished, and all of it is done, whether you would have told me what was happening. If I hadn't found the letters, if I hadn't pushed." She looked at him directly. "Would you have told me?" The question sat between them for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I think I would have. I think I was finding my way toward it." He paused. "I didn't expect you." "Nobody expects me," she said. "That's generally been useful." This time he actually smiled. Not the corner of the mouth near miss, a real one, brief and unguarded, and it changed his face completely. She looked at her coffee so she didn't stare at it. "Try to sleep," she said. "We have a meeting tomorrow, and I'd like both of us sharp for it." She got up and went back to her room. She lay down, and this time she actually slept not well, not long, but real sleep, the kind that means some part of you has decided you're where you're supposed to be. Whitfield was waiting in the church vestibule when they arrived. He was older than Lily had expected, mid-60s, a county commissioner's careful dress, on a frame that had gotten smaller than the clothes, remembered the look of a man who'd lost weight from worrying. He had a leather satchel on his lap, and both hands on top of it, and he stood up when they came in with the reflexive dignity of a man in a public role, and then seemed to remember that that was precisely what he'd come here to stop being. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "Mr. Whitfield." Caleb didn't offer his hand, not hostile, careful. "This is my wife." Whitfield looked at Lily. Something moved across his face. "You're the one who went to the records office," he said. "Yes," she said. "Garrett mentioned you to Hale," Whitfield said. "I was in the room. Hale told him to watch, that you'd probably come back." He paused. "He didn't expect—" He stopped. "He didn't expect me to have already found what I was looking for," Lily said. "No," Whitfield said. "He thought you were a distraction. He thought Mercer had brought you in because he was getting nervous and wanted something to throw in front of people's attention." He sat back down. "He was wrong." "Tell us about the records," Caleb said. Whitfield opened the satchel. What he'd kept was meticulous. 3 years of payments recorded in a ledger that was both damning, and Lily suspected the only thing keeping Whitfield alive, because a man who keeps that kind of record is a man Hale can't afford to kill without knowing where all the copies are. It was self-preservation disguised as conscience, and she didn't hold it against him. Most people's courage was made up of several less noble things combined. The records showed payments to 6 county officials, including the registrar. The payments coincided exactly with the filing dates of the fraudulent transfers. The registrar's name appeared 11 times. 11 times. Lily looked at each entry. She didn't need to write anything down. She had it. She'd always have it. "This closes the case," she said to Caleb. "Yes," he said. He was looking at the ledger with the expression of a man who has carried something so long he's forgotten what it feels like to put it down and is only now remembering. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "when you walk out of this building, you're going to need to stay somewhere. Hale can't reach you. Do you understand that?" "I have a sister in Butte," he said. "Go there today," she said. "Don't stop anywhere. Don't tell anyone where you're going except Marshal Briggs, and do that through a messenger, not in person." Whitfield looked at her, the same look Briggs had given her, the same look Clara had given her, the look she was starting to recognize as the one people gave a young woman when she said something they'd needed an older man to say before they'd listen to it. "Yes," he said. "All right." He handed the satchel to Caleb. He stood and put on his hat. He looked between the two of them. "I should have done this 2 years ago," he said. "I want you to know I know that." "You're doing it now," Lily said. "That's what counts today." He nodded. He went. Lily looked at Caleb. He was holding the satchel with both hands, the same way Whitfield had held it, like something finally arrived after a very long wait. "We need to get this to Briggs," she said. "Yes," he said. "Right now." They left the church together, moving quickly into the bright, cold Montana morning, and she thought about the paper she'd signed 4 weeks ago, and the girl who'd signed it. The girl who'd said, "I am not property," to a room that wasn't listening. Somebody was listening now. Everybody was about to listen. She kept pace with Caleb step for step, the satchel between them and the marshal's office 3 blocks away, and she didn't look back. Briggs was at his desk when they walked in. He looked at the satchel in Caleb's hands, and he looked at their faces, and he stood up without saying anything and closed the office door behind them and locked it, which told Lily everything she needed to know about how seriously he was taking the next few minutes. "Whitfield came through," Caleb said. He set the satchel on the desk. Briggs opened it and looked at the ledger and turned the first 3 pages and stopped. He didn't say anything for a moment. He turned 2 more pages. His jaw worked once the way a man's jaw works when he is containing something he doesn't want to put in the room yet. 11 payments to the registrar," Lily said. "Each one within 10 days of a fraudulent transfer filing. The dates align exactly with the documents I flagged at the county office." Briggs looked up at her. "You've already cross-referenced them." "In my head," she said. "Yes." He looked back at the ledger. "This is enough," he said. "This is more than enough." He closed it and put both hands flat on top of it, the gesture of a man claiming something. "I'm sending a wire to the federal office in Helena today. I need a federal deputy here by tomorrow at the latest." "How long before Hale finds out you're moving?" Caleb asked. "He probably already knows I requested the county records this morning," Briggs said. "Garrett would have sent word within the hour." He straightened. "Which means we have less time than I'd like and more evidence than I expected. And the only question is whether I can get federal authority in place before Hale does something that makes this messier." "What would he do?" Lily asked. Briggs looked at her with the directness she'd come to respect in him, the quality of a man who thought it was insulting to protect people from true answers. "Destroy records, move money, put pressure on witnesses." He paused. "Or move on the Morrison property before the investigation officially begins, because once a legitimate claim is filed, it becomes much harder to reverse a completed transfer." The Morrison property. The family that was next. "Today," she said. "If I were Hale and I knew what was coming," Briggs said, "I'd move today." Lily and Caleb looked at each other. She saw the same calculation moving through him that was moving through her. "Who's on the Morrison land right now?" she said. "A woman named Agnes Morrison," Briggs said. "Ruth's mother, 71 years old. She refused to leave when Ruth and the children went to Billings. She's been there alone for 4 months. The room went quiet. Lily thought about 71 years old and alone on a piece of land that had been in a family for 40 years, while men with paperwork closed in from every direction. "Someone needs to be with her," Lily said. "I'm sending a deputy to her now," Briggs said. "I have one man I trust completely. He leaves in 20 minutes. "That's one man," Lily said. "Hale won't send one man." Briggs looked at her steadily. "No, he won't." He picked up the ledger and locked it in the safe behind his desk, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd already made several decisions and was executing them in sequence. "Mercer, I need you here in town close to this office for the next 24 hours. If the federal deputy arrives and needs to depose you, I need you available." "Understood," Caleb said. "Mrs. Mercer." Briggs turned to her. "I need your written identification of the document discrepancies formalized into a deposition. Signed and notarized today before close of business. I have a notary 2 doors down who I trust." "I'll do it now," she said. "Good." He moved to the door and unlocked it. "And I need you both to understand, once I send that wire to Helena, this is no longer a county matter. Hale's reach in this county is significant. His reach into federal proceedings is not. That's the ground we're moving on to." "Send the wire," Caleb said. Briggs nodded once. "Give me an hour." The deposition took 40 minutes. Lily sat across from the notary, a small, precise woman named Mrs. Halverson, who had the quality of someone who'd witnessed a great many things and had opinions about all of them, and expressed none of them professionally, and she spoke everything she'd seen into the official record. Every date, every document number, every discrepancy, the way the ink sat differently under the notary stamps, the variance in pen pressure between the legitimate signatures and the ones that weren't. Mrs. Halverson wrote it all down without comment. At the end, she looked at what she'd written, then at Lily. "You observed all of this in a single visit," she said. "Yes," Lily said. Mrs. Halverson looked at her for a moment with an expression Lily was beginning to recognize, the recalibration look, the one people gave her, when she turned out to be something other than what they'd filed her as. Then she stamped the document with the precision of a woman who took the weight of a notary stamp seriously, and signed beneath it, and dated it. "Good luck, Mrs. Mercer," she said. It came out like something stronger than luck. Lily took her copy and walked back to Briggs's office. Caleb was inside with Briggs and another man she didn't know, younger, trail-worn with the look of someone who'd ridden hard to get somewhere. "Deputy Crane," Briggs said when she came in. "He rode in from the Helena office this morning. I sent the wire yesterday evening when I left your place." Lily looked at Briggs. "You sent it before we brought you Whitfield's records. What you told me Tuesday night was sufficient," he said. "Whitfield's records make it definitive, but sufficient was enough to start moving." She handed him the deposition. He looked at it and passed it to Deputy Crane, who read it with the focused attention of someone building a picture in real time. "The signature discrepancies," Crane said. "You can testify to these." "Yes," Lily said. "Under oath in any proceeding at any time." Crane looked at her. He was young for a federal deputy, maybe 30, with serious eyes, and the measured manner of someone who'd learned early that you gathered information before you formed opinions. "How long have you been in this county, Mrs. Mercer?" 4 weeks, she said. Crane said nothing. His expression, though, asked the question his professionalism kept him from asking out loud. "She found in 4 weeks what I couldn't prove in 2 years, Briggs said, which was more than Lily expected him to say, and which she recognized as its own form of testimony. Crane looked back at his documents. "All right," he said. "Here's where we are. I have authorization from the federal marshal's office to initiate an investigation into fraudulent land transfers in Dust River County. That authorization was issued this morning based on the evidence in Marshal Briggs's wire." He set the papers on the desk and faced them both. "I need to move on the county records office today before Garrett removes or destroys anything. I need a witness present when I do, someone who can identify specific documents as matching what they previously observed." He looked at Lily. "Me," she said. "If you're willing," he said. "I'm willing," she said. "When?" "An hour," he said. "I need to coordinate with Briggs. We go in officially with a federal warrant. Garrett can't refuse entry, and he can't remove anything in our presence." He paused. "But the moment we walk through that door, everyone in this county who's on Hale's payroll is going to know what's happening." "What about Agnes Morrison?" Lily said. Crane and Briggs exchanged a look. "Briggs's deputy is already en route," Crane said. "One deputy," she said. "Mrs. Mercer." "I'm not questioning the decision," she said. "I'm stating a fact. One deputy and a 71-year-old woman and 40 years of her family's land. If Hale sends men there today, one deputy is not enough." She looked at Briggs. "Is there anyone else you can send?" Briggs's jaw tightened in the way she'd learned meant he was confronting a gap between what he had and what he needed. "I have 2 other deputies. One is in Billings. One—" He stopped. "One what?" she said. "One I'm not certain about," he said quietly. The room went very still. "You think he's on Hale's payroll?" Caleb said. "I think it's possible," Briggs said. "I haven't been able to confirm it. I've been keeping him away from anything sensitive." Lily thought fast. "The families who gave testimony," she said to Caleb. "The ones closest to Morrison's land." "Could any of them?" Hendricks, Caleb said immediately. He's 3 miles from the Morrison property. He lost his own water rights 2 years ago, and he's been waiting for something to do about it ever since. Would he go? She said. If I ask him? Caleb said he'd go in 10 minutes. She looked at Briggs. He looked at Caleb. The decision moved between the three of them in the span of a breath. Go, Briggs said to Caleb. Get Hendricks to the Morrison place. Now, before we move on the records office. If Hale is going to react, he reacts there first. Caleb was already at the door. He stopped and looked back at Lily. The look was quick, but it held everything they hadn't said in the kitchen at 2 a.m. Everything that had accumulated across 4 weeks of cold coffee and locked desks and night visitors, and a girl who'd sat down in a barn with a fallen letter and changed what was possible. Be careful, she said. You too, he said. He left at a pace just short of running. Yet, Lily walked into the county records office beside Deputy Crane 50 minutes later with a federal warrant and the complete recall of everything she'd seen in that room 9 days ago. Garrett was at his desk. He looked up when they came in, and his face did several things in rapid sequence. Recognition calculation, the particular stillness of a man deciding whether to run while simultaneously knowing there was nowhere to go. Mr. Garrett, Crane said. Federal Deputy Helena Office. I have a warrant to examine all land transfer and water rights filings from January 1870 to present. You're required to provide full access. You may not remove, copy, or alter any document during this examination. Garrett stood up slowly. He was looking at Lily, not at Crane, at Lily. The small, careful eyes weren't careful now. They were something else. You came back, he said. I did, she said. You're going to want to sit down, Crane said to Garrett. This is going to take a while. It took 3 hours. Lily went through every filing Crane pulled, and she confirmed or flagged each one with the methodical precision she'd built over 4 weeks of doing exactly this kind of work. She found 6 additional discrepancies beyond the 4 she'd originally documented, 6 more transfers, where the signatures didn't match where the notary stamps had been added after the fact, where the dates didn't align with the records of who had been present. Crane documented everything. He was thorough in the way of someone who understood that this paperwork was going to survive court challenges from lawyers whose entire profession was finding the gaps in exactly this kind of work. Garrett sat in the corner of the room for the entire 3 hours. He didn't speak. At some point, he put his head in his hands, and Lily looked at him once, and then looked away, because she didn't have anything to give him, and she wasn't going to pretend she did. When they finished, Crane sealed the flagged documents in a leather case he'd brought for exactly this purpose. He turned to Garrett. I need you to come with me to the marshal's office, he said. You can come voluntarily, or I can make it formal. Your choice. Garrett looked up. His face had the quality of a man who'd known this was coming, and had thought he had more time. I'll come, he said quietly. They were halfway back to Briggs's office when Lily heard the horse. Fast. Too fast for town. She and Crane both turned at the same moment, and the rider was one of Briggs's men, the deputy she hadn't met. Not the one Briggs was uncertain about, the other one pulling up hard and leaning down. Morrison property, he said out of breath. Hale sent 4 men. They got there an hour ago with transfer papers. They're saying the land is already signed over, and they have legal authority to remove the occupant. Lily felt something drop through her chest. Is Agnes Morrison still on the property? She said. She was when the message left, he said. She's refusing to go. Briggs's deputy is holding them off, but... Is Caleb there? She said. Got there 20 minutes ago with Hendricks and 2 others, the deputy said. That's why there's still something to hold off. She looked at Crane. The transfer papers they're carrying, she said. They're fraudulent. I can identify them as fraudulent. The signatures the notary stamps if someone's produced new documents in the last 48 hours they've used the same method, and I will recognize it. Crane was already moving. Can you ride? Yes, she said. Then let's go. Agnes Morrison was not what Lily had expected, though she'd stopped being surprised by that particular feeling. She was small and white-haired, and she was standing on her own front steps with the posture of a woman who had been standing on those steps for 40 years and intended to keep doing it. And she had a look on her face that Lily recognized in the way you recognize something in yourself that you didn't know had a name. Hale's 4 men were at the fence line. They'd stopped there because Caleb was on one side of them, and Hendricks and 2 other men, Lily didn't know, were on the other, and the geometry of the situation had not resolved in a way that was comfortable for anyone. Crane rode in with the authority of a federal badge, and the situation changed immediately. 2 of Hale's men looked at each other with the expression of men recalculating whether what they were being paid was worth what was happening. "Federal deputy," Crane said. "I need to see the transfer documents you're carrying." The man who appeared to be in charge, late 40s, the calculated bearing of someone who did this kind of work regularly, handed over a folder without a word. He was good at not showing what he was thinking. But his eyes moved to Lily when she dismounted, and she saw him register her, and she saw him understand something. She took the folder from Crane and opened it. It took her 40 seconds. "Fraudulent," she said. She pointed without touching. "This signature, the registrar's name, it's the same false hand as 4 of the documents I flagged this morning. The pen pressure is identical. The notary stamp has been applied over already dried ink, which means it was added after the document was completed. This transfer was never legitimately filed." She closed the folder and handed it back to Crane. She looked at the man who'd handed it over. "Whoever gave you these documents gave you forgeries," she said. "Which means you've been sent here to remove a woman from her home using paperwork that has no legal standing. I'd think carefully about what you do next." The man looked at Crane, at the badge, at Caleb, at the 2 other men flanking him. He did his calculation. "We'll be going," he said. "You'll be going to the marshal's office," Crane said. "All 4 of you, voluntarily or otherwise." 2 of them went without further argument. The other 2 needed a moment, and Caleb provided the particular quality of stillness that made moments like that resolve quickly. When it was over, Lily walked to the steps where Agnes Morrison was still standing. The old woman looked at her with eyes that were clear and dry, not because she wasn't feeling anything, but because she was feeling too much of everything at once, and had learned long ago that crying was for later when the immediate thing was finished. "You're Mercer's wife," Agnes said. "Yes," Lily said. "Ruth wrote to me about him," Agnes said. "She said she hoped someone was trying." She paused. "Are you the one who's been doing the trying?" Lily thought about how to answer that honestly. "We both have been," she said. Agnes looked past her at Caleb, who was across the yard, then back at Lily. "He's a good man," she said. "I wasn't sure for a long time, but a good man doesn't send people to stand next to an old woman when it gets dangerous. He comes himself." Lily looked at Caleb. He was talking to Hendricks something low and serious, but he was watching the steps without appearing to watch them. "No," she said. "He doesn't." Agnes reached out and put her dry, thin hand over Lily's. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Victor Hale was arrested the following morning. Not in his office, not with ceremony. Crane and Briggs went to his house at 6 in the morning, which was the deliberate choice of men who understood that timing was its own kind of statement. Hale had a lawyer present within the hour, which meant he'd been expecting it, which meant he'd known since the previous afternoon, and had spent the night preparing rather than running. He was smarter than he was brave. Lily noted that and set it aside as useful information about the kind of man he was. She wasn't there for the arrest. She heard about it from Briggs afterward in his office with Caleb beside her, and the full case spread across the desk between them like something finally at rest after a very long journey. "His lawyers are going to fight it," Briggs said. "Federal proceedings take time. He'll claim he didn't know the documents were fraudulent. He'll blame Garrett and Whitfield and the registrar and everyone else." "Will it work?" Lily asked. "No," Crane said from the corner. He'd stayed through the night. He looked tired in the way of someone who didn't care that they were tired. "Not with what we have. The ledger alone ties him directly to the payments. The fraudulent transfers tie the payments to specific outcomes. Your testimony ties the document production to the same method across 6 years. He looked at Lily. You're going to be deposed formally within the week, and I expect you'll be called to testify in the federal proceeding. I'll be there, she said. Both of you will, he said. Briggs leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, with the expression of a man setting something down that he's been carrying long enough to have forgotten what his shoulders felt like without it. The county registrar turned himself in this morning, he said. An hour before we went to Hale. He has his own ledger. Turns out Whitfield wasn't the only one keeping records for protection. Good, Lily said. That's good. The water rights, Caleb said. The ones that were illegally transferred. How long before they can be challenged? Federal proceeding establishes the fraud first, Crane said. Once that's on record, the civil challenges follow. It won't be fast. It won't be simple. But the Morrison deed, the original, the one you brought from Clara Dodd, that's going to be the foundation. If that holds, and it will hold, the others can be rebuilt on the same argument. Lily thought about Ruth Morrison in a boarding house in Billings, writing letters she didn't know if anyone was reading. She thought about Samuel Pruitt pressing hard into the paper so each word would be clear. She thought about 40-something families and what they'd lost and what couldn't be given back and what might be. I want to write to Ruth Morrison, she said, today, to tell her what's happened. Do, Briggs said. She deserves to hear it from someone who was in this room. She wrote the letter that afternoon at Caleb's desk in the house that was hers, now in all the ways that mattered, and still not entirely hers, in all the ways she was still figuring out. She wrote carefully the way she wrote everything honestly, without promising more than she could promise, without softening what was hard. She told Ruth that the deed was safe, that it had been used, that the people who'd taken her land had been named and would be held to account. She told her it wasn't over, and it wasn't going to be fast, and there were no guarantees, except that people who knew what had happened were not going to let it go. She told her that an old woman had stood on the steps of a house and refused to move, and that it had mattered. She didn't tell Ruth about herself, about the paper she'd signed, or how she'd come to be in this county. That wasn't Ruth's story to carry. Ruth had enough to carry. She signed it Lily Mercer and sealed it, and she sat for a moment with it in her hands. Caleb came in while she was sitting there. He looked at the letter and at her face, and he pulled out the chair beside her, the same way he'd pulled it out the night they'd worked side by side until past midnight, and he sat. You told her the truth, he said. Not a question. As much of it as was hers to know, she said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, one of the hands was calling to another across the yard. Something ordinary about the horses. And it was such a normal sound that it caught her off guard. The sound of a day proceeding as days preceded work and weather and animals and people, all of it continuing despite everything. Lily, he said. She looked at him. I want to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything practical, he said. She raised her eyebrows slightly. All right. When Forsyth came to your mother's house, he said, and the arrangement was proposed, I could have said no. I want you to know that I thought about it. I told myself I was accepting it because refusing would leave you without protection. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. He looked at his hands, then at her. The whole truth is that I'd spent 4 years watching people lose what they'd built, and I was tired of doing it alone, and I told myself that was not what I was thinking when I agreed to it. She watched him. But I was thinking it, he said. And you deserve to know that from the beginning, and you didn't get to, and I'm sorry for it. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the ordinary sounds of the world continuing. You gave me a room with a lock, she said. Yes. And a key I controlled. Yes. You didn't ask me for anything, she said. Not once, in 4 weeks. No. She thought about all of it. About 18 years old, and a pen in a shaking hand, and a word she'd said to a room that wasn't listening. She thought about what she'd found in those 4 weeks. Not what she'd expected to find, not cruelty, or ownership, or the thing she'd braced herself against, but a fight, and a man who was tired, and a cause that needed more than one person to carry it. "You were finished the moment you started this," she said. That was what he'd told her weeks ago. "I was finished the moment I started this." She'd held it since. She'd understood it differently at different times. "But you didn't stop." "No," he said. "Neither did I," she said. He looked at her with everything he didn't have words for yet, and she looked at him with everything she hadn't decided yet, and between those two things was something real. Not the paper, not the arrangement, not anything. Forsyth had written in his careful hand, something that had been built in cold kitchens and county offices and barn doors and church vestibules and the side of a road where a girl had pushed her horse to a gallop and not looked back. "The paper," she said, "the one I signed." "It doesn't define anything between us," he said. "It never did." "I know that," she said. "I'm not asking you to pretend it doesn't exist. I'm asking you." She stopped, found the words. "I'm asking you whether what comes next is something we decide. Both of us. Not Hale, not Forsyth, not a debt and a signature. Us." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "That's what I want, if you want it." She thought about her mother's kitchen, about the house that was still standing, about every choice she'd made since the moment she'd walked through the door of this ranch with a canvas bag and a folding knife and a decision not to be small. She hadn't been small. She wasn't going to start now. "Then that's what we do," she said. She picked up Ruth Morrison's letter. She stood. She put it in her coat pocket to post in the morning. "Come have supper," she said. "Tom's been cooking since 4 o'clock and he's going to be put out if we don't eat it." Caleb stood. He was almost smiling, the real one, the unguarded one, and she turned toward the kitchen before she could stare at it too long. She had walked into this house 4 weeks ago as a signature on a paper, a transaction completed a girl who had said, "I am not property," to a room full of people who weren't listening. She walked through it now as herself, as the woman who had documented the fraud carried the deed. Turned the tide stood on the right side of history in a county that had been running out of people willing to stand anywhere at all. Victor Hale would answer for what he'd done. The families would begin the long work of reclaiming what was theirs. Ruth Morrison would read a letter and know that her deed had mattered, and that an old woman had stood on her mother's steps and refused. And Lily Carter, Lily Mercer, who had been sold at 18 to a silent rancher and had walked into a war she hadn't been told she was entering, had decided entirely on her own terms to stay. Not because of a paper, not because of a debt, not because anyone had told her to. Because she had chosen it. Because she was the one who chose now, and from here forward, and there was no going back to the girl who hadn't known that yet. She had signed her name once under pressure with shaking hands. Every signature that followed was hers.